Welcome to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. I'm Max Tawney, media editor here at Semaphore, and with me as always is my boss, our editor-in-chief, Ben Smith. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Max.
This week on the show, I know we're both really excited. We're going to be talking to the guy who is running the most popular streaming service in the world, and that's YouTube CEO Neal Mohan. We're going to talk to him about YouTube's huge podcast viewership growth, the FCC's kind of scary recent threats to investigate the platform, and if YouTube has changed its mind about how it polices its own content.
Yeah, he's got an enormous amount on his plate, enormous amount of power in this media moment.
Well, we'll dig into all of that right after the break. So, Ben, usually at this point in the show, we have a bit of a wind up about who this week's guest is in case people don't really know who they are and why we're interviewing them. I don't really think that we have to explain to anybody what YouTube is.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube at this point is kind of the water in which the media industry swims. Arguably, I think the most important media company, certainly the most important platform in the world. I don't know if you remember when Chris Balfe was on a few weeks ago, founder of a company called Red Seat Ventures that Fox just bought. I think we asked him what the biggest surprise of the year was, and to him it was that there had not been a real challenge to YouTube's just unquestioned dominance. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, there's some small challengers in different kind of lanes, right? Like YouTube has to compete for creators' time and efforts with places like Instagram and TikTok. Spotify is kind of trying to get to kind of push some of its creators, it's the people it pays, into putting video, uploading video podcasts. Kind of works, kind of doesn't. I don't really know, but nobody is there that's challenging YouTube as a whole, full stop.
I kind of think our audience is still pretty audio, though, right? Like, people should tell us, ben.smith@semaphore.com. But I feel like sometimes, like perhaps today, we will change locations and outfits stealthily, and I never get any email about that, which makes me feel like we're still safely audio first. But I don't know.
I don't know, Ben. I think people want to see our different outfit changes and kind of different my different fits. I think that's something that some people are demanding.
So you're getting the email. All right, fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know we're super excited. We recorded this interview a little bit earlier. Why don't we just jump right into it?
Thank you so much for joining us, Neal.
Yeah, Neal, thank you so much for coming on.
It's great to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
So one of YouTube's main advantages, or maybe the central fact about YouTube right now even, is just the absolute scale. There's just nothing like it in the world. And you guys announced this statistic a couple of weeks ago. I think Max broke the story, actually, that 1 billion people consumed some piece of podcast content on YouTube. And I guess I wonder, because when you see these big digital media numbers, and you always wonder kind of what does that mean? I assume it means that like 1 billion people will watch this interview. But if it doesn't mean that, can you just tell us a little bit about that? So, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would just say about that is, and Ben, you and I have talked about this actually in the past. We view ourselves as, kind of in our own lane. Basically, we're a video sharing and watching platform, but the term video really means video and audio first and foremost. And when we first started working with podcasters and thinking about podcast content, and now I'm going back, I'm like before COVID even, it was primarily about audio. And it was basically the fact that video and audio sort of works the same way in terms of consumption sharing. Like they're different formats, but they sort of can work the same way with recommendations, etc. And we wanted to cater to people who listen to that type of content, so non-music content, so to speak, right? And that's where our investment and kind of start with podcasts kind of happened. But very early on, we made like 2 or 3, I think in retrospect, pretty significant bets. And they were first that, and maybe because we're YouTube, we kind of bet on the fact that video podcasts would be a thing, right? Like that people would want to not just listen to a conversation, although lots of people do that on YouTube today, but also, see who's having that conversation and just sort of to feel sort of part of that. And of course, I think, COVID accelerated that a little bit when we were all sort of locked in our homes and people just kind of wanted to watch that happening, either on the big screen in the living room while they were going about, doing their business in the kitchen. So that was a big sort of bet. The second was that discovery would really matter, right? Like that it wasn't just about sort of a podcast that you heard from a friend or what have you, and then you kind of checked it out and you sort of have it in your feed now, that it was that sort of serendipity would be an important part of podcast consumption, just like it is for video consumption in general. And so that was a pretty, I think, in retrospect, kind of a pretty salient sort of aspect of our approach. And then kind of the third piece, and if you think back to sort of where podcasts came from around, RSS feeds and things like that, we bet on the fact that like podcasters are not different than video creators in the sense that they'd want to host their content somewhere and sort of take advantage of all that sort of comes with it. And so these three insights, I think, were things that we sort of bet on early on. And I would say that our success in podcast, including the number that, you and Max were talking about, the billion users, was like an overnight success many years in the making, and mostly because of those kind of three points that I mentioned.
And those billion views, like, do you have a sense of what share of that is a 90-second clip in Shorts of like Megyn Kelly owning me in an interview or something like that, and what share is somebody watching, say, more than half an hour? Do you have a sense of like, how much of that is in Shorts?
I don't have that breakout off the top of my head. I mean, just in terms of how our watch time sort of works on the platform, I imagine a lot of that is really the full sort of podcast content. Whether somebody's watching all the way through, the full 3 hours of a particular podcast or not, that obviously varies from podcast channel to channel and kind of user behavior. But in order to get to those types of numbers, especially, things like 400 million hours of podcast content on television screens a month, like, you're consuming a lot of content. It's not just Shorts.
So, speaking of the podcast content on television and just YouTube content on television in general, what I'm really curious about is how are people watching it? Not in terms of how are they watching it on TV, but what are the ways in which they're watching it? Are they watching it like television, like we used to watch television, where it's like you kind of put it on and flip through stuff and it's kind of ambiently on for hours? Are they just kind of popping in to watch a quick video to show their friends? Like, I'm sure it is all of the above, but what does the actual habit kind of look like when it comes to watching YouTube on television?
I think particularly for younger viewers, and as you know, our platform skews young in terms of the people that are on it every day. When they're turning on the TV, they're turning on YouTube and they're consuming it the way that for them, that's just their version of that's television for them. And so first and foremost, probably the most important kind of trend that we see is it's all forms of content. So, I think the expectation, especially a younger viewer who, grew up with their TV experience really being YouTube, expects to see their favorite creator, their favorite podcaster, their favorite gaming live stream, an NFL game, a new, music video dropped by their favorite artist, all in one place. And I think that's a pretty big, significant sort of consumer behavior shift, in the sense that, especially for younger viewers, that expectation is that all of that content will be in one place and it will show up in a way that's intuitive to them in their feed of recommendations and kind of how they consume it. And so I think that hopefully that gives you a flavor of sort of like that's sort of like the canonical use case that we see. Underneath that, in terms of the type of content that's consumed versus not, I would say that it's actually almost virtually completely overlapping with what, if you're a user and you're on both mobile and watching it on a television screen, generally speaking, you're watching a lot of the same content. Now, of course, if you're, watching an NFL game, you might prefer it on the living room screen, right? Just because you want to watch it on the biggest screen in your home. But if your favorite creators on your phone are generally your favorite creators on the on the television screen. So that's what I'd say about sort of user behavior. The one thing that I have noticed is I think more and more creators are paying attention to the fact that in many cases, the majority of their watch time comes from television screens. And so you're starting to see this in terms of sort of like more of the cinematic palette that creators use. And I mean, we have YouTubers that do really, really amazing work to take advantage of, all those sort of that very large screen and everything they can do with the pixels on that large screen. You're starting to see sort of longer form, more episodic content, of course, around all content verticals. And that is obviously consumed on mobile and television, but I can see that TV is an aspect of that. You're seeing lots of creators shoot in 4K, for example. So you're seeing that in the nature of the content. But one final point is, it really is every type of content. One of the fastest growing screens for shorts consumption is the television screen. So people watch a lot of shorts, YouTube shorts, on TVs.
You're describing a kind of professionalization of the content in part, though, more episodic, higher production, made for a bigger screen. Another way to say that, I think, sometimes is more expensive. I mean, is this converging with produced television in terms of, among other things, it's how much it costs to make?
I think that there's still, if you're talking about sort of kind of traditional sort of linear production budgets and things like that, I think, frankly, there's still a pretty meaningful delta. And I think that some of that, and by the way, I don't equate those two things. And, you and I have talked about this in the past. I don't equate those two things with quote unquote production quality.
So you don't think user generated content's going to get like pushed out by higher and higher end stuff?
I mean, we don't see it. I think going back to kind of my answer to Max's earlier question, I think our viewers, the 2 billion people that come to YouTube every single day, expect all of that content to be in one place. So they could be watching, a 30-minute episode of Michelle Carre's Challenge Accepted, and then the next thing might be, a 5-minute vlog from an up-and-coming creator. And, the core essence of successful creators on YouTube are people who are able to establish kind of this authentic connection with their fans, and all of their success really stems from that. And that is a much, much higher correlation than, production value or production budget or anything like that.
Interesting. And one thing that strikes me, we were talking to someone earlier on the show about what their biggest surprises were last year, and they said that it was that there had not been a significant challenge to YouTube, that YouTube's dominance sort of remained unchallenged. I do think it's kind of an extraordinary moment for you guys in terms of your centrality. And when I look at that, I think everyone is gunning for you. Every company, whether it's Fox with Tubi or TikTok, is thinking, how do we grab a piece of YouTube's business? And I wonder, in a serious way, what keeps you up at night? What competitors do you think of as serious? Where do you think, what do you worry about?
So first of all, I mean, the way you characterize it is right. I mean, we are the way, sort of just taking a step back. The way I think about it is, I really do think that, and you could say that, yes, of course, Neal's going to say that, but like, I really do think that YouTube is in a bit of its own lane in terms of what we do for viewers, for creators, for our media partners, what have you. We're not social media. We're not a place you come to sort of connect with your friends or family or what have you, share posts, etc. We're not sort of traditional television. We're sort of our own thing, this place for creation and sharing and watching of video content. And that's what we do. And as a result of that, I think that we see, as you point out, lots of competition, lots of dynamic sort of kind of changing companies from all of those pieces, from streaming, from kind of, short form video, from music, from, other subscription services, et cetera. So I view all of those. But when it comes to like your core question about sort of what keeps me up at night, like, I really think that our lifeblood ultimately is about catering to our core constituents. Like, if we are not delivering for our creators in two very fundamental ways, then we're in trouble. And those two ways are really, are we helping creators build audience? And sometimes that takes time, but are we helping them steadily build an audience. Like YouTube should be the most efficient way to connect a creative idea or a creator with their fans, no matter where they are in the world. So are we living up to that aspiration? And then the second is, which has been core to our mission from very early days, is are we helping them make money? We are the original and largest creator economy. It's something that I'm very proud of. We've paid out $70 billion to creators and, media companies and all of our partners over the last 3 years. So those are the two things that we absolutely have to do. And then the flip side of that is you accomplish those two things if you're actually delivering what you all, myself, what we all want as viewers, right? So when you open up the app on your phone, when you open it up on the television screen, are you actually getting what you really want, what speaks to you as a viewer? And those, in an essence, that's what I focus on. That's whenever I have conversations with creators or partners, that's what we talk about. And that's sort of what keeps me up at night. That's what I focus on.
So the answer is not what keeps you up at night. It's not Netflix thinking about getting into podcasting, as was reported a few weeks ago. That's not so concerned about that necessarily.
Well, I mean, I think it just goes back to kind of what I said, which is if we can, for those podcasters, deliver on those two things that I mentioned, then we're doing our jobs, and that's really what we want to focus on. I think our job is to actually build the best stage for them, and it's our creators and our podcasters and our musicians and artists that stand on that stage.
What kind of podcasts have you noticed do well on YouTube versus on Spotify or, Apple? Is there a difference? Is it stuff that's more visual? Do you kind of pay attention to that at all? The differences between how these podcasts perform on different platforms?
I mean, I don't look at it specifically in terms of like how a specific podcast does on YouTube relative to other platforms. I can tell you sort of what we talk to our podcasters about. So you hit on one of them, which is I do think video matters. And so, advice, I mean, and you guys are doing it with your channel, right? Like, it's not about the production quality. It's not about sort of fancy cameras or what have you, but having video does make a difference. And I think it has to do with the fact that tends to be more engaging, and it sort of gives consumers choice. If they want to just listen to the audio, they can, but this way they can watch what's happening as well. And so that's one aspect of it. So yeah, that's one piece. And I think the other is just what I say to all creators, which is if you have a creative vision or if you have an idea about what you want to talk about, what you want to share, then stick with it. Be steady about it. Be clear in terms of the contract you have with your audience. Like, don't confuse them. And that's advice that we give to, I give to creators, but the same thing applies to podcasters on YouTube too.
I notice we're all sort of going in and out of using the word program, podcast, show, creator. Does the word podcast still exist in 5 years? Or is it like one of these words, like almost like blog, that's going to go away as all this stuff merges and professionalizes? Like if it's like two people sitting on a camera talking to each other, is that just like a cable television show? I mean, what's the, is podcast an enduring idea, or is that sort of run its course?
I mean, the way I think about it, Ben, is podcasters that are on YouTube are YouTubers. They, generally speaking, have the same sort of questions, the same sort of challenges, and the same sort of asks of me as our broader YouTubers do, as our kind of what you would call endemic creators, to use kind of the terminology of the day. And so I think of them that way, right? Like, is Theo Von a podcaster, or is Theo Von a YouTuber, right? Like, is Lex a podcaster, or is he a YouTuber, right? Like, and I think that podcasters who are really successful on YouTube, like, they think like creators. They really think as if they're having that conversation with their guests, but really with the audience, right? Like the audience is sort of there. And so that's sort of the way that I think about it. And by the way, it comes up in a very tangible way, which is the features and the technology that we build to make them successful are quite similar. Yes, of course, like, we all as viewers might or listeners might want certain types of controls. podcasts tend to be episodic, right? Like those types of things. And but frankly, that applies to other types of creators as well. And so that's sort of how I think about it.
I mean, good television broadcasters also too, right? I mean, isn't it all sort of? Is it? I mean, is it? It just feels like it's all converging.
Well, you again, you know this, but we work with all those traditional, kind of quote unquote traditional media companies on YouTube every day. And by the way, and I'm saying YouTube, I'm not just talking about YouTube TV. I mean on the main YouTube experience. And again, there I feel that the creator, the traditional media companies, the broadcast partners, etc., that view themselves as creators are the ones that end up being successful in our platform. And many of them operate dozens of channels around their characters or their IP or what have you, and they really think about themselves as YouTubers. In fact, when I have the conversation with our advertisers and brands, I say something similar, which is ultimately, long-term success on YouTube comes from the fact that you think of yourself as a creative entity first and foremost, like really invest in your channel. And then, of course, we have strategies around paid media and, advertising products and, investment in AI and those types of things. But first and foremost, you want to engage, your prospective customers with some creative storytelling. And, YouTube's a great place for that.
You've said that the number one priority for YouTube is the safety of YouTube's ecosystem. And we're in a moment when that's actually like a slightly unusual thing to say. And a lot of platforms are really backing off anything like content moderation, partly because of pressure from this White House and this administration. And I wonder if you feel like there's tension between you and the administration on, I guess, particularly issues around public health.
I'll say a few things. First, and kind of probably most important and kind of really at the top is everything that we talk about, everything we just talked about in terms of the business, how content works on our platform, et cetera, is back to our mission statement, which is to give everyone a voice and show them the world. And the first half of that mission statement is really about free expression and freedom of speech. And I can say for myself, and I know for many of the colleagues that I work with every single day, that's why we come to work. Like, that's the power of YouTube, right? Like, that if you have an idea, you have a thought, and you want to share it with the world, then YouTube is a place where you can go and share it without somebody telling you that you don't sound the right way, or you don't look the right way, or you're saying the wrong thing, or what have you. And that is core to our mission, and everything that we do is ultimately, frankly, in service of that. And so it's the reason why, actually, I think we've had community guidelines from the very early days. And in order to allow creators to be able to share their ideas, have this free sort of voice, freedom of expression, and to earn a sustainable living from it, we also have rules of the road in terms of how our platform works, right? Like no porn or adult content or financial scams or what have you, right? Like back to the question around, like, when you turn on the TV, like, that's not what consumers are looking for when they turn it on, and our advertisers, right, the brands that support that content aren't looking for. And so our approach to responsibility is with all of that in mind, right? But ultimately towards this goal of a freedom of expression. That's how I've always looked at it. And even in years past when you and I have talked about it, hopefully I've been consistent in terms of that sort of core thesis. The other aspect of that is kind of sort of implicit in your question around, you talked about health information. A lot of that is about sort of the broader context, right? Like YouTube, the reason why we're the epicenter of culture is because we reflect what's happening in the world, right? And what was happening in the world in March of 2020 is very different than what's happening in the world in March of 2025. That's a long period of time. It was a very, very different world back then, where nobody knew what was going on. Frankly, people were, dying in hospitals every single day in New York City. People were climbing 5G cell towers because they thought they were getting some disease from cell towers. It was a pretty crazy time. And so having health-related policies that apply to that time is very different than 5 years from now, where we've, deprecated, frankly, almost all of our COVID-19 policies. And so what I'm trying to point out is that it's, at least from my standpoint, staying true to the principles of free speech, but also sort of facilitating, these community guidelines, but also then being flexible and cognizant of the broader context is really important. And that's always been our approach at YouTube. And that's sort of how we think about these questions around content.
There were some RFK Jr. videos, I think, that you took down back in the before times, and as you say, in these very kind of chaotic moments. Now that do you think you're gonna restore those?
I mean, I can't speak to the specific videos, but on a policy standpoint, as I said, most vast majority of those of anything that was related, and I don't know the context of these videos, but anything related to our COVID-19 policies are things that we have deprecated. And, frankly, every time I share that, it sounds pretty natural to people when I say that, because again, I think most people would recognize that, where the world was 5 years ago is very different than where it is today. And I think that's pretty important.
Do you think it was kind of a mistake? And I don't mean by YouTube, because I think I remember I talked to Mark Zuckerberg early in the pandemic and had a conversation about, wow, like maybe amid all the debates over speech, at least the public health stuff is so obvious. It's so easy. We can rely on the doctors. In retrospect, not only was that, I think, there were legitimate debates over public health, and maybe that aperture should have been wider, but also it sure seems like attempts to shield people from quote unquote misinformation and from absolute lunacy, just as a matter of fact, backfired. And and vaccine acceptance in the US right now is lower than it's been in a long time. Like, was there something, do you think, like in a big picture sense, did we kind of get that whole misinformation thing wrong?
Yeah, I don't, again, I think that the way I've thought about it is, sort of the context really mattered. I mean, again, back to that time period, science and kind of knowledge around what was happening to all of us, our families, our friends, was like being created by the week, right? Like it was pretty remarkable time if you think about sort of where, if you just kind of rewind back to March of 2020, right? Like sort of at the precipice of this sort of world-changing event. And I'm sure books will be written for decades to come in terms of its impact on all of us as human beings, society, all those types of pieces. I mean, I think the one thing, again, just back to YouTube, that I would say that sort of is a bit, kind of the nature of YouTube, I think, is different than, perhaps some of these other platforms, in the sense that, like, it's a place where people come to listen to, Taylor Swift or Sabrina Carpenter, or watch an NFL game, or, watch their favorite, gaming streamer or what have you. So just, the use cases and kind of how people engage with YouTube was different than some of the other platforms. And so I think the nature of sort of the challenges presented to us was just a bit different than it might have been on some of the other platforms as well. And I think the context of how users use and what exists on these platforms and sort of how they work is also important when you kind of have this broader conversation around content.
So I want to ask you about something that's in the news. I'm sure you're aware of this. Great American Media, which is a Christian broadcaster, recently filed a complaint to the FCC claiming that YouTube TV was essentially discriminating against Christian programming by refusing, and this is what they're saying, refusing to carry its cable networks. The FCC, the new FCC commissioner, Brendan Carr, said on Newsmax this week or last week that he believes that the complaint is credible. I'm curious how you're thinking about that and what your response is to that.
Yeah, I can say hopefully pretty plainly that we don't discriminate on the basis of that sort of content. We're in, I think, productive conversations with Great American Family Network around YouTube TV, which is, I think, what the central question was around. we base those decisions, the way that you would imagine, a distributor like YouTube TV would, which is based on, business considerations in terms of audience and audience demand and what have you. But we're having productive conversations. I look forward to having my team explain that to the FCC in detail. And so that's really how that conversation has gone on the YouTube TV side. Great American Family has a channel on YouTube. It's quite a large channel. I think it's over 100,000 subs, millions of views. And of course, from a reach standpoint, the aperture of YouTube, the main app, is orders of magnitude larger than YouTube TV. But we're in, productive conversations with them on the YouTube TV side as well.
Our growth strategy for this podcast, obviously, is torturing media executives with kind of dicey policy questions. And I think we actually do have a pretty, core audience of people who are very engaged with these issues around, media and marketing and telecoms. But do you have any advice for us on growing a big YouTube audience beyond that? Because I'm not sure that's like totally working in terms of YouTube virality.
Do we have to do the like Mr. Beast freeze, frames, like with the, with the kind of like, do we have to have Ben doing the kind of like extremely expressive faces? Is that going to be the key to our success, do you think, Neal?
I did look at I like your thumbnails. I did
the
look at
thumbnails are okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I did look at I looked at the channel. I've been a subscriber of the channel, so I might be in your sort of core audience.
You're definitely right in the core audience. Yeah. So I'm very pleased that you're watching.
Yeah. Well, I would just actually, in all seriousness, I would say a couple of things. I do think that like some level of predictability with your audience is really what truly matters, especially as you're getting started. I do like the fact that you guys are doing video. I think that matters, right? Like it just gives you, I think, sort of like this natural sort of use case on all surfaces, at least as it relates to YouTube. So I think that's sort of an important piece. Look, I think having a short strategy, right, really, even if it's a pointer back to kind of your long form, is another important aspect of it. And so those are some of the sort of core pieces that I have. But I really think that, in many times, I always sort of the analogy I like to use is your YouTube channel is kind of more like a library than it is like a feed or kind of like a trend of the day type of a concept. So, its value should only increase over time. So like, I do think patience is an important aspect of it. And you're going to have probably a much larger portion of your audience discovering that channel a year from now than today. And it's like important to sort of continue to sort of have that big picture in mind as you're growing it. Like the other thing, and sort of the last thing that I'll say is because we are creator forward, I do think sort of like the authentic personality, your guys's, kind of faces and sort of how you banter back and forth and audience expectations around that type of thing matters on YouTube. So
well,
that's my like whirlwind tour of sort of how you should think about your channel.
I appreciate it. And I suppose to make this really meta, so to speak, we should disclose that our sponsor is in fact Google, your parent company, which has not at all affected the content of this interview.
Well, Neal, thank you. You've given an interview and business advice to us, so we really appreciate it. We should thank you twice. So thank you so much, Neal. Really, really
Thanks,
appreciate
Neal.
you taking the time today.
All right. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
Max, I was thinking you're in some ways like more of a podcast native than I am. You started your career as an intern at the Gab Fest. You've been in and out of podcasts for a long time. Do you kind of fundamentally buy this idea that YouTube is going to swallow what I had thought of as an audio medium?
I think that's a really interesting question, and that kind of is like the question that's driving a lot of conversations in our business. I think that it is true that YouTube has figured out the thing that has been the most difficult for podcasting in over the course of its lifespan, which is discovery, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that is truly the thing that it mastered, that Spotify can't compete with, that Apple can't and doesn't really want to compete with. I mean, up until now, truly the way to discover a podcast was like, somebody told you about it. Oh, there's this great podcast that I've been listening to, or like a list somewhere of the best new podcasts of the year, something like on Vulture. And I do think that YouTube has mastered that. And so it has become a great place for discovering podcast content, which does feel new and kind of unique. I do think that there is an element to which podcasting as audio only will never go away, because so much of the ways that people consume it truly is like at the gym, in their car, doing an errand on speaker. My mom listening on 2x speed, which is horrifying. She listens to this show on 1.5x.
Maybe you sound like you did when you were a little kid.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it brings back some memories. I think that I think that it's never going to totally just become fully television, but I mean, I think you're definitely going to kind of continue to see that convergence. I don't know, Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny you say, 'cause I think the car for me, for a lot of people, is the main use case, and I think self-driving cars are just gonna wipe out. I mean, the radio business is built on driving, and I
Yeah.
think that yeah, I don't know. Maybe sort of audio only podcast. I'm so sorry for Matt Bellany, who, by the way, people were very excited to see what he looked like, which was amazing. Our the great Hollywood podcaster who was on the other day, but who is audio only. I wonder if a sort of audio only podcast becomes like sort of a twee print magazine or something.
Yeah, it's true, though. At the same time, again, it isn't that interesting to watch several people in front of a microphone, despite the fact that millions of people, clearly billions of people, clearly do. I just think that there's still plenty of things that you have to do in your life while not looking at a screen that will continue to favor kind of audio only. I don't know. I feel the opposite of you, Ben. Most of my podcast consumption is at the gym and walking down the street in New York City. I can't watch it. I'm not, watching a tiny little thing on my phone. I don't know.
I see more and more people walking down the street in New York watching a tiny little thing on their phones.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and I think the imperatives of video start to take over, right? Like you can listen to CNN as audio, but obviously they're producing for a visual medium, and you miss stuff. And I think there'll be a kind of an inevitable pull in that direction. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm curious what you thought about, the most newsy part of the interview, which was, his comments about the FCC and about the FCC and Brendan Carr kind of realizing that despite all of its, the little things it's doing to these kind of declining media companies, that the real place where it could make some noise is, is YouTube, where a much larger share of people are consuming content. To me, I thought that the most interesting thing about the FCC, about the whole saga, is that the FCC wants to get into the game there because they know that it's relevant. But I'm curious what you thought about both the recent, kind of regulatory threat and also Neal's answer.
So, yeah, I mean, the FCC, which regulates broadcast, and so it's a little bit boxed out from all the interesting stuff in media, has found through YouTube TV, kind of, I think, at least thinks they have kind of a way into harassing YouTube. I would say, I mean, some things in Trump world are very new. I think some of what the FCC is trying to do is very new. This particular thing is very old, which is to say, people who want broadcast carriage using friendly political agencies or members of Congress to make noise on their behalf. There are broadcasters like, Democrat. I think Byron Allen has long employed arguments and public arguments and statements that people who don't give him carriage are racist. In the context of these complicated carriage negotiations, which are ultimately about money, as Neal said. I mean, it's not a particularly like savory part of media, but what it is, I mean, I think the thing that if you're someone like Neal who spent his career in the unregulated world of digital media, I mean, I thought he dealt exactly the way a regulated broadcaster deals, which is like, well, we look forward to talking to the regulators, and we're in talks with this small broadcaster, which, who knows if they actually wanted to carry or it was commercially made sense to carry, but if it's going to get the regulators off their backs, they'll carry them.
Yeah. It's obviously, I feel like, to kind of show my own cards here, my own bias, I think I found Neal's argument to be very compelling. Obviously, having just written this article, for Semaphore about the growth of conservative media aimed at younger women. I was kind of down a rabbit hole on like Christian content for younger kind of Christian women, which kind of bleeds into some of this kind of Maha like trade wife stuff. And I found the idea that YouTube was not friendly to Christian and conservative content to be not aligned with my experience as somebody who had consumed a lot of stuff on YouTube itself, which is of course the bigger platform.
I mean, it's sort of the oldest trick in the book to get friendly regulators to lean on broadcasters to give you carriage. What's interesting is that Google, YouTube are now in their crosshairs in a serious way, having been this unregulated space over on the internet.
This is what happens when you win, though. This is like
Totally.
Everybody perks up and they notice.
Heavy is the head, and
yes.
I mean, yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
I think the basic reality of YouTube to me, and the interesting thing is how unchallenged they are. But one big challenge, and we kind of got at this a bit when Neal was talking about how the content is sort of moving up market. They're moving in the direction, inevitably, I think, of Netflix. Do you think Netflix is ultimately the real challenger to YouTube? That's really going to be the titanic media struggle of the next generation?
I think it seems like that's what's playing out now, right? Because it's a battle for all of our attention and where we spend our time, right? Where we kind of put our eyeballs, and we see signs that Netflix feels in some ways threatened by YouTube just by what some of their actions are. There was a report in Business Insider a few months ago that made some waves about how Netflix was thinking about getting into podcasting, which I don't quite understand how that would work. But, from the perspective of Netflix, you got to think like, okay, we make all of these stand-up specials. We pay all these comedians to do it. The rest of the time, they're all just producing their own content just for free on this other platform, essentially. It does seem like when it comes to hours spent with these different services and platforms, that YouTube is its obvious competitor, and that in some ways YouTube has won in terms of attention. But that's because they do have a better business. They don't spend any money on their content.
I mean, that is it, right, Max? You can't beat free.
Well, that is it for us this week. We wanted to thank Neal Mohan, of course, for joining us. Thanks for listening to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. Our show is produced amazingly, expertly by Shina Ozaki, with special thanks to Max Toomey, Britta Galanis, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, Jules Zern, and Tori Kaur. Our engineer is Rick Kwan, and our theme music is by Billy Libby. Our public editor, as always, is Brendan Carr.
It's good to remain unregulated, however. And if you like Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and feel free to review us.
And if you want more, you can sign up for Semaphore's media newsletter, which publishes every Sunday night.